Hello friends and welcome to the Rayo Moon Oracle. I'm Rayo and today we are continuing our Tarot Discovery series with card number 13, the Death card. Usually a bit of a scary one in the tarot, one that a lot of people don't like to see pop up, but we're getting into that point now with some of these later cards in the Major Arcana. We've got lots of big ones coming up with Temperance and the Devil and the Tower, so these are our intense energy cards. So let's dive in a little bit further to the Death card. So I've got 3 cards that I pulled for us for today for my various tarot decks. So we'll look at that, so those keywords, those other meanings, the astrology, numerology, and then we'll get into those reversals at that point. But it's like following that full through their journey, right? We're getting into those middle stages of life, big things happening, big choices, big worldly events, like life happening, really happening to our full here at this point. So with like, okay, hey, here's the Wheel of Fortune, here's the life moving, here's working through on the path, making those decisions, now we're at this point where it's like, okay, we're letting things die, letting things transform in our lives, coming into a new rebirth. And that's some of those key words for our Death card here. So keywords for the Death card, we've got change, transformation, opportunity, rebirth, new chapter, transition, closure, upheaval, metamorphosis, evolution, loss, a cycle, that like life cycle, the process of letting go, release, purifying. Words I liked too that were in there was that like immortality and beauty, actually. Very interesting concepts with the Death card as well. In terms of a yes or no, generally it's going to depend on which way the card's kind of facing, in my opinion, if it comes out in the upright or in the reverse, because usually it's going to be upright is going to be yes, because it's like, okay, hey, that new process is starting, that new rebirth, versus when it's in the reverse, that's a no to me, because it's like, okay, you're resisting that change, you don't want to do that thing, or that thing's not going to happen. In terms of numerology, it's the number 13, so usually seen as a very unlucky number in Western cultures, the number 13. And then you add it up, the 1 plus 3 is 4, and that is an unlucky number in other cultures, a lot of Asian cultures, actually. So a lot of negative association and kind of some fear associated with that Death card, and even in the numerology that's tied to it. But 4, adding up into that 4 number, it's still that same stability. You can't avoid death, right? A death happens to everybody, happens to lots of situations and things. So it's that same stability where it's like you can always trust that it's going to happen in a weird kind of context. And then you've got that like 1 with that awareness piece, and the 3 coming in with those like cycles again. Astrologically, the Death card is associated with Scorpio, so that water element, the planet of Pluto, which is associated with that underworld and that death process again, those deep emotions, that flow of life. So common imagery you're going to see in this card, obviously the skeleton. Skeleton's pretty strong, but that's that again, that stability showing up in death. That's death is at least always, it's always there, it's always consistent, there's consistency there. And that's the holding of the self too, so that the death and transformation process that happens with this card and with those, when that it's showing up in your life, it's the skeleton that holds ourselves in, it's holding us all together, it's that process. And there's also a lot of rebirth in that. So you'll see symbology wise that you're going to see the sun potentially, like a new dawn potentially in some of the cards. You're going to see a baby or other things that represents that new birth process, again, that cycle, that continuation. So other meanings for this card, absolute beginnings and endings. They're tied together, again, that cycle process. It'll represent abrupt change a lot of the time, that sudden death, showing something needs to end. But it can be show the positive after a lot of suffering, that again, that transformation, that new energy coming in. So that destruction leading to new growth. So there's a release of old patterns, an end for a new beginning. So that, again, that constant moving, that constant cycle. So we're trying to let go of the old ways of thinking, our old negative patterns and mindsets, to embrace that change, drawing a line and moving forward. Death cards are really good at representing that energy, where it's like, okay, this is the end of this. Now it's time for the next new thing here. Because there is that invincibility of death. Like it's going to happen. It's always going to happen. We can't stop that from happening. So no one can destroy death, so death comes for us all, and you can't resist it. And that's when, as we get back into the reversals later on in the video here, there isn't a too much or not enough. It's just whether or not you're accepting of what's happening or you're resisting of what's happening. So last little bits of here. So it's like that one door closes, the new one opens, putting things in the past and moving forward. So the 3 cards I pulled for us today, I have one from the first one on top here is from the Tarot of Oppositions. So this one, I usually kind of like holding it in the sideways position or horizontal position here because it shows more clearly the 2 sides of the coin in this case, in the case of the card Death. So one side of the Death card here, we see the sunrise. It looks like a death that is a little bit more friendly feeling, showing the flower on the flag and that rebirth and new life coming in after the death, after that transformation, versus the death on the negative side, the reverse side, lot more dreary feeling. There's the death figure is holding a scythe versus that flag. So being cut down by the situation either way, that you can't resist what's happening. It's going to happen to you either way. So the pain that comes from not releasing things, not letting go when we need to, and that desolateness showing up with the snow and then the crumbling of the wall. There's no sun on this side of the card. And then the death figure is looking away from us versus looking towards us, and the positive on the other side of the card. So the inevitability of that strength of that feeling is there, where it's just like it's sad and powerful and inevitable at the same time, but you're getting dragged along versus going willingly. Somebody resisting death and change in their life versus embracing it and moving forward. So a very strong card for the Tarot of Oppositions. I really liked this one. I think it's interesting. The sun's stuck behind the clouds in this case. There's still a little bit of light there, but it's very gloomy and dreary, versus on the positive side of the card where it's coming up over the edge of the castle there and showing that new dawn, that new life coming in. And the death card, the death figure in this case, the skeleton, where it's like, okay, on the upright side, the positive side, when it's looking at you, it's like it feels welcoming. It feels like, okay, hey, we're moving on to this next phase of life, this next step. So you're coming in willingly versus getting dragged along by the reverse death figure in that case. So that's the Tarot of Oppositions. The next one I have right here is from the Santa Muerte. This one's interesting because it's specifically called Santa Muerte, and this is what the whole deck is named after. So the lady, Saint of Death in this case. And what I think is really interesting for this death figure specifically, we do see a scythe there, but we also see a cradle, and that the death figure is pregnant. Very, very representative of that rebirth, that new life coming in amongst the death. So we see that moon figure, that sun kind of figure, that celestial body around the head, representing again that saintliness, that divinity of the figure itself. So death being a divine figure is a very interesting concept. Not a new concept in some cultures, but in terms of like Western culture, it's like, okay, hey, like we don't honor death. We don't, there's a lot more fear of it here actually. And it's like, it's not, it's something to be feared and not thought about versus celebrated, like it is in other cultures. Celebrated and a part of the process, a part of moving through life, and honored. So we definitely see the feeling of honor for the Santa Muerte in this card, specifically in this death figure, with that kind of like halo sun around her head. And it doesn't feel like a female in this case based on the clothing, and the obviously the pregnancy leads to feminine energy. So the fact that the figure is pregnant is a very interesting concept too in of itself, for being a skeleton, right? So a skeleton, a figure that is dead, quote unquote dead, being pregnant at the same time. So an interesting dichotomy there, and a back and forth, and kind of that cycling process, those oppositions, which we talked about the Tarot of Oppositions itself, but that's really that opposition shows in this card here. So the elements of death, which is the skeleton and the scythe, and then the elements of birth and life, which is the pregnancy and the cradle. Very, very heavily tied in together, all right next to each other, on top of each other. What's interesting to note that I just like literally caught my eye here off the like out of the corner of my eye is the hourglass that the Santa Muerte is holding on the left side of her right there. So again, that wheel of time, that movement forward, that inevitability, the immortality of death. So very, very cool. I like the little dragon, lion dragon in the bottom right corner there next to the cradle, kind of calling back to the strength card. And then let's see, anything else here? I don't know. I just always like looking at the Santa Muerte cards because as I get like deeper in and closer into some of the cards, I'm like, oh, I didn't see that. I didn't see that little symbolism. I didn't see that little element there. So that's a really cool piece to that card. The last tarot card I have for us is from the Light Seers. And this one, it's very, very striking. I really, really liked this death card because the card literally is named Death, has the infinity symbol, and then rebirth on it. So that process, that cycle again, that transformation, that change coming through. And the death figure in this case is not like the skeletons that we normally see. There's not shape or... There is shape, but there's not body to this death figure specifically. We get an idea of shape because it looks like somebody is in a hood, but the what we would see as the face there is this whole other world, this whole other piece with the light and the stars and this celestial energy coming through. So really calling to that death and transformation being of a very high divine energy again, similar to the Santa Muerte with the kind of halo celestial body around the head there. So the process being very, very strong for, hey, this is death coming is a divine and holy and unavoidable like piece of life, and there is a lot of energy and honor and spirituality that comes with death and that rebirth process. So in the case of the death card, it is scary for people a lot of the time, especially again Western cultures where death is feared. But death in this case isn't always referring to a like physical death of somebody, yourself, or somebody we love. Death happens in multiple ways in multiple areas of our lives constantly all the time. So you can say a situation like a career, your career has died, right? It's like, okay, you left that job, that job has died now. A friendship ends, a relationship ends. Those are their own kinds of death. Every year we see death because we see nature cycling through its processes, right? So it's like the grass dies back, new seeds are sown into the ground for next spring and rise up again. The trees go through their own kind of death rebirth process for losing their leaves and then coming back in the spring. They don't completely die, obviously, but there is as there's always death in nature, there's always rebirth as well. So a tree getting burned down during a forest fire, a lot of those trees actually need that forest fire in order for those seeds to come out of the cones and sow into the ground and come back as new trees at that point. So the nature is specifically formulated or has figured out ways for the death of itself to regenerate and regrow again, coming back in. So death is it's a much more broad concept actually than what we normally would perceive in our more Western culture here, because there's death everywhere. There's death constantly all the time. If you just it's an end. If you think about end as death, then everything ends at some point or another, right? We don't live forever. Situations don't last forever. Things always do come to an end, and that itself is a death. So if thinking about death in that way, as it comes through in the tarot, is not necessarily, it doesn't make it as scary, it doesn't make it bad or a bad card to see. It's definitely an intense energy to see and definitely an intense energy to feel and interact with, but it encourages us to go with the flow of it at the same time, versus as we get into our reversals now here when we're resisting that change. So If we're resisting the death process that is inevitable, that is happening, our death card shows up in reverse, and it can indicate an inability to grieve, that we can't move on, that we have this deep fear of change. The change ends up being very painful potentially because we're resisting it versus flowing into it. So we can feel blocked and stagnant. Words are really, really liked in association to the reversal of the death card is festering and decay. So things being in place too long, that aren't moving forward, that are going through this painful change, right? That pain starts to fester, starts to hurt more. That's where you get that like infection and decay feeling coming in. Very, very strong feelings and imagery associated with that to me. There's an immortality aspect of it, and that comes through in both the positive and negative, because it's like, again, it's, you can't resist it, you can't avoid it, it's just inevitable at this for everything. But if you're having your death in reverse, we're still trying to resist that change. There's stagnation, and that ends up more painful in the long run versus just letting the process happen. We can be fearful of our new beginnings. We can have resistance. We're avoiding and letting go of those repeating patterns. Our negative patterns are repeating again. And when the death card shows up in reverse, it's a more indication that the universe is going to force you into a change and force you into the death process versus you just going with it and letting it happen and working with it. Again, it's going to happen either way, so I would rather go with the flow of it versus having the universe force me into it, because that's going to be way more painful and hard to deal with, honestly. So we don't want to be digging in our heels. We don't want to be stuck in limbo. Again, these keywords and imagery associated with the reversal of death. And we don't want to have fear of the unknown. That's part of what the death in reverse is that fear of the unknown. So we dig in our heels. We get stuck in limbo. We don't want to move forward into our new beginnings. So all of those are part of the indications of a death coming in reverse in a tarot reading. So super, super strong imageries now. Or not that the Major Arcana is not strong and has strong imagery in of itself, but we get into these it feels more powerful and cosmic right now. I think with the retrogrades happening, as I'm going through the Major Arcana too in these tarot videos, I'm like, oh, yep, this is where this directly applies to my life, and this directly applies to my life there. And it seems to just, like, as I'm progressing through the tarot, the Major Arcana specifically, I'm like, oh, here's my life progressing in the same way. It's very odd and interesting, and a little weird at the same time. But for the death card, don't be scared of it. Not obviously my favorite to see come out sometimes too, but if you're aware of things going on in your life, if you're in tune with your intuition, you already know what's happening, and you already know that piece is coming. So it shouldn't be a surprise to you to see it pop out in a tarot reading if you are aware of what's going on in your life. So don't resist it. If it's happening, don't resist that death process, because it's going to hurt more. And you're going to get that fester and decay and more pain. And it's still going to happen anyway, because you can't avoid it. So that is all I have for us today for our tarot series, our learning the tarot. It's interesting going through each card, and I'm enjoying this process a lot just for my own benefit and well, hopefully it benefits you as well, and hopefully you learned something. But please like, comment, and subscribe down below. That helped me out a lot. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.